I'm James Rosone.
And I'm Miranda Watson. We're the husband and wife writing team that created the military thriller Monroe Doctrine series and the military sci-fi series The Rise of the Republic.
We have some additional content we'd like to share with you guys today, and we hope you'll find it informative and entertaining. We're planning to create more videos similar to this in the future.
As always, please like, share, and subscribe. Now let's get started.
Vengeance, Book 4 of the Falling Empires series, written by James Rosone and Miranda Watson, narrated by B.J. Harrison. Disclaimer: This is a fictional story. All characters in this book are imagined, and any opinions that they express are simply that, fictional thoughts of literary characters. Although policies mentioned in the book may be similar to reality, they are by no means a factual representation of the news. Please enjoy this work as it is, a story to escape the part of life that can sometimes weigh us down in mundaneness or busyness. Chapter 1: The Great Escape, Geneva, Switzerland. Johann Baer was practically beside himself when he'd heard his friend Roberto was missing. At first, it was suspected that his disappearance was related to a robbery or even a kidnapping for ransom. But when 3 days had passed and his body hadn't turned up and no one was demanding money for his return, Johann became paranoid that he might have been snatched up by the Americans. When French and Brazilian intelligence looked into the matter, they discovered that Roberto's name didn't appear on the Air France passenger manifest, despite the fact that several flight attendants claimed he was on the plane, sitting in first class. To further compound the mystery, there was no record that he had ever purchased a ticket. Even the airport security cameras, which should have captured him leaving the plane and walking through the airports in Geneva, Paris, and Rio, all lacked any images of Roberto. It was like he had been electronically erased. The French firmly believed that the only way this was possible was if another foreign intelligence agency was involved. Johann knew that the only countries that had this level of sophistication were the Russians, the Chinese, the Israelis, the British, and most certainly the Americans. The thought of the Americans interrogating Roberto was unnerving. If he broke under their questioning, he could expose their entire scheme. Johann placed several calls to Eric Jahn, Peng An, Lance Solomon, and, of course, Marshall Tate. They all agreed to pony up millions of dollars as a reward for information leading to Roberto's safe return. Peng and Eric also dispatched a small army of PMCs, bounty hunters, and intelligence specialists to Brazil to aid the local government in finding their most prominent citizen. Despite all this, Johann still had to carry out the duties of UN Secretary General without letting anyone know of his inner turmoil. If their conspiracy were to come to light, it would not only be the end of his political career, it would destroy his legacy, and it could topple the entire United Nations organization. His assistant poked her head into his office. "Mr. Secretary, the coalition partners have arrived. I have them taking their seats in the briefing room." She was a young, beautiful 20-something. He liked a little eye candy for the office. She was also a trained BND operative, which Johann used to his advantage frequently to acquire more information on selected individuals. "Thank you, Monica. I think I lost track of time," he replied. He stood up and walked toward the briefing room just down the hallway from his office. Upon entering the room, Johann made his way around the table to personally shake each person's hand and greet them. He made sure that each member was given a moment to speak with him before the meeting started. It was his way of trying to keep them all on his side. Finally, he sat down and brought the meeting to order. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a lot to discuss, so let's get down to it," he announced. The Russian defense minister opened it up. "The weather is finally warming, which means the polar sea lanes are opening back up. We've dispatched a number of icebreakers to try and clear us a passage through them. It's a much shorter journey from Russia and Norway through this route than it is traveling further south, around Greenland. It's also not currently patrolled by the U.S. Navy." "The challenge isn't moving ships through the area," said General Mackenzie via video teleconference. "It's finding a port that hasn't been bombed by the Americans, or that won't be bombed when they learn we have a ship in port. Let's not forget that we've also taken a vast majority of the American satellite system offline," the German defense minister countered. "The few remaining satellites they have, as well as their airborne reconnaissance assets, are mostly focused on the Chinese front. That works to our advantage." "I agree," asserted the Russian defense minister. "The Chinese have finally entered the war, and it's drawn all of America's surveillance assets away from Canada to Mexico and the Pacific. We can and should use that to our advantage." With a stern look on his face, the Dutch defense minister bellowed, "I think the bigger question we have to ask is how many more forces are we willing to commit to this conflict before we pursue some kind of terms to end it?" The Dutch might have been the hardest hit during this war. More than half of their ground forces in North America had been either killed or captured. Their government was taking a beating in the public opinion for their continued support of this war against a once strong ally. The Americans had also paid several of their major ports and industrial centers a visit, thoroughly bombing some of them beyond repair. "I think we have come too far, invested too much, and lost too many soldiers not to see this through to victory," the Norwegian Minister of Defense replied. He paused for a moment before adding, "With the severe losses we've sustained in Canada, we may need to consider shifting our forces to the southern front. I'm not sure we're going to be able to supply and support our northern front, given the continued American blockade of Canada and their relentless attacks against their ports and airports." The French defense minister angrily shouted, "So you would have us abandon our forces? That would condemn our northern armies to defeat. Our northern armies have already been defeated. We just haven't accepted it yet," the Norwegian insisted. "We can't break through the blockade, and we can't use the civilian or military airports. How are we supposed to keep our forces supplied? The weather is turning to spring, and the Americans have nearly pushed our forces back to Canada. If we adjust our efforts now and send our replacement forces to join the Chinese in the south, we may still be able to defeat Saxe." Several of the defense ministers in the room nodded in agreement. Shaking his head in disgust, the French defense minister barked, "Had the Germans not surrendered the bulk of their forces in Chicago, we wouldn't be in this situation." "How stupid are you?" exclaimed the German defense minister. "Our forces got surrounded in a city of several million people. We had no way to resupply them and no means to break them out. When we told Saxe we'd turn the city into an American Stalingrad, they sent their stealth bombers to systematically destroy the German power grid." He paused for a moment as he angrily shook his head. "We didn't have a choice. The Americans were destroying 3 power plants a day, and they were going to continue to do so until we ordered our troops to surrender." Johann held his hand up, trying to calm everyone down. He didn't need another blow-up in one of these meetings like what had happened with the Chinese several weeks ago. "Gentlemen, we are all on the same side. Let's not forget that. Germany was backed into a corner. The division commander got outmaneuvered and was summarily trapped in the city. He also shouldn't have threatened to turn the city into a smoldering ruin. That forced the Americans to pursue a drastic response, which ultimately led to the division having to surrender. Now, let's move past that and figure out how we can support this growing militia force and the Chinese operation in the south. I think I have a few ideas on how we can speed some of that up, the Russian defense minister offered. The rest of the meeting was spent discussing a path they hadn't fully embraced at the outset of the war, but that looked more appealing by the day: the use of private military contractors. April 8th, 2021, Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, CIA Safe House. I sure hope this works, Seth. Smith was unusually nervous. The man was usually cool as a cucumber, but not today. It'll work. These guys have done this many times. We just need to be ready and at the marina when they tell us to be. Breaking into the conversation, Ashley asked, "What about the rest of us? How are we going to get out of the country?" Looking at Ashley, Smith explained, "Already been covered. The Assistant Secretary of State for Western Hemisphere Affairs is arriving today. She's going to be meeting with the Prime Minister tomorrow. While she's in the meeting, the regional security officer from the embassy is going to drive you guys in their diplomatic vehicles to the Assistant Secretary's private plane. You'll all get on, and when she's done with her meeting, she'll head back to the airport and join you. She'll fly you out under her diplomatic cover." "That'll really work?" Ashley asked, a bit skeptical at the idea. Smiling, Smith replied, "This isn't the first time we've done this, Ashley. Yes, it'll work." "Okay. Then how do you want us to approach the embassy?" she asked. Smirking at the question, Smith replied, "Ashley, they aren't actively looking for you or anyone else yet. It's not like your cover's been blown. You guys will just walk up to the embassy, present yourself, and the Marines will let you in. Coordinate with the Legate if you're still concerned about it. He's your friend. He can help you if needed." Blushing, Ashley quickly replied, "Sorry, I guess I'm just not used to all this cloak and dagger stuff. I got swept up in worrying about how you two are getting out of here with Lammy." Seth sighed. "As long as our cover isn't blown, or they catch wind that we have Lammy with us, we should be fine." Mid-Atlantic. Commander Jet looked at the new orders with a bit of skepticism. What are they up to? He wondered. "Change to our orders?" asked his XO as he entered the CIC. Nodding, Jet handed him the paper. "USS Laboon is to make best possible speed to coordinates and wait 50 miles off the coast of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil," he read. Sounds like secret squirrel stuff, but all the way down there?" the XO asked. He handed the orders back to the skipper. "Ours is not to reason why, but to do or die, XO. Get us turned around and let's make best possible speed to our new coordinates," the skipper ordered. In just a few moments, the ship was racing to try and be in position at the appointed time. Norfolk, Virginia, Chambers Field. Lieutenant Calland watched several of his sailors help load 2 of their rigid inflatable boats, or ribs, into the back of an Air Force C-17 Globemaster. The giant cargo plane could fit both of their ribs inside, along with the crew. Walking up to SB-1 Ross, Lieutenant Calland asked, "Is everything set? The boats are all rigged up and ready?" SB-1 Ross looked at the LT, as if to say, "We know what we're doing, sir." But he held his tongue. He knew the man was just doing his job. "Everything's all set, sir. We've even brought some extra gas with us in case we need to extend our range to link up with the Laboon." Lieutenant Calland nodded. "Good job, Ross. Your team is on it as usual. Do you have any reservations about the pickup location?" Ross shrugged. Not really. This doesn't look like it's going to be a hot pickup, so we have that going for us. I think bringing extra fuel is going to give us more options in case the ground team has to make a last-minute change. Okay, just wanted to get your opinion on it. Calland paused for a second as a couple of the Special Warfare Combatant Craft crewmen yelled at one of the Air Force loadmasters over something. Turning to look back at his men, Ross responded, "If you'll excuse me, sir, I need to go see what kind of trouble my guys are stirring up." Smiling, the LT headed back into the office next to the hangar. As soon as he entered the room, someone told him, "This is going to be a tricky mission, sir." Surprised, Calland turned to look at the senior chief who'd made the statement. "What makes you think that, Kavanaugh? 20 years experience doing this kind of crap?" "Okay, Chief, what's your concern?" "First, this is really short notice. We normally have a few weeks to plan a mission like this, not 24 hours. A lot could go wrong. Second, we have no air or naval support once we're inserted. Third, unlike most of our missions, they're sending 6 SEALs with us. That means they think this mission could go south, which is why they're beefing up our security and firepower. Fourth, I'm not sure if you're aware of what's going on in Brazil right now, but there's a nationwide manhunt to find the General Director of the World Trade Organization, who also happens to be a Brazilian national. My money says he probably has something to do with this little last-minute mission that's been cooked up." Lieutenant Calland paused for a moment to think about that. He suddenly felt a bit less sure about this mission than he had just a few minutes ago. Finally, he replied, "Those are good points, Chief. I don't have an answer to that, other than to say we've been given a mission, and it's our job to make sure it happens. Just stay on the men, and let's work to make sure everything goes smoothly, and we get our people home." "Will do, sir. Just wanted to put some of that out there between you and me. That aside, if the ground team is able to get a boat and meet us at the pickup location, this mission should be a walk in the park." 6 hours later, the crew was loaded up in the back of the C-17, ready to get airborne. The boat crews and 6 SEALs accompanying them were ready to pick up this high-value package. When the rear door to the aircraft closed, the pilots applied power to the engines as they raced down the runway. They had a long flight ahead of them, some 17 hours when they included the mid-air refueling they'd need to make an addition to the surreptitious flight path around Brazil. Lieutenant Calland heard from the pilot that they'd be changing their transponder to appear like they were a U.S. Navy P-8 flying an anti-submarine patrol. It would give them a cover for flying around the land portions of Brazil and explain why they'd be flying below 10,000 feet from time to time. Once the aircraft had delivered them, it would turn around and link up with another refueler before it made the long trek back home. Now it was just a matter of waiting until they reached the insertion point. CIA Safe House, Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Sitting low in the rear passenger seat of the SUV, Seth couldn't believe how quickly things had fallen apart. Shortly after Ashley Bonhoff and the other members of their team arrived at the embassy, someone had caught on to who they were and connected it with the disappearance of Mr. Lamy. An unknown surveillance team had been camped outside the embassy, taking pictures of every person who came and went since Roberto Lamy had gone missing. Somehow, someway, they'd managed to piece together who Ashley was, as well as the other FBI agent, the 2 people from the NRO, and the DoD rep. Once they knew their identities, they looked at the aerial surveillance of the embassy and backtracked where Ashley and her crew had originated from. That eventually led them right back to the safe house and the urgent warning Smith had received to get Lamy the hell out of there. Fortunately, Seth and Smith had already strapped Mr. Lamy into the third-row seat of the BMW X750i when the local station chief told them to get out. He'd said he had a source in the security service who tipped him off that a raid was being mounted to capture the people they suspected were holding Mr. Lammy. They had minutes to get out of the compound before it would be surrounded and they'd be trapped. A local agency guy sat in the driver's seat, wearing a sports jacket, expensive watch, and black sunglasses. He sported a stylish modern haircut. He looked the part, like he belonged in this rich, exclusive neighborhood, driving this extremely expensive SUV. Smith and Seth sat low in the back seats as their driver drove through the neighborhood toward an alternate safe house they'd try to hole up in until the rendezvous time. As they drove, 4 police cars whipped past them with their lights on, but no sirens. Trailing behind those vehicles were several large trucks, presumably carrying a SWAT team. Staying low, Seth shot Smith a nervous look. "That was close," he said. "Yeah, way too close. There's some serious assets being used to track us if they found the house this quick. I'm not even sure the alternate site is going to be safe." Keeping his eyes on the road and his head straight, the driver suggested, "I think we should drive you guys to the marina and get you on the boat. Now that the authorities have a lead, they're going to really turn the screws on us. They'll shut down the bridges and toll roads. It'll make it nearly impossible for us to drive back in the city if we leave." Seth glanced at his watch, then looked up at Smith. "We could do that, but we're going to be more than 3 hours earlier than the original pickup time." Smith stared for a moment at Mr. Lammy, who still had a piece of tape covering his mouth. "It's still going to be light out when we get to the marina," he said nervously. "It could be a problem." "I can give him a sedative," Seth countered. "He'll be a lot more cooperative." Sighing, Smith finally relented. "Take us to the marina. We'll try to make it work." The driver nodded and immediately grabbed his phone. "Antonio?" the driver asked. "Yeah, we're coming early. We need the boat fueled up and ready for us to leave in 30 minutes. Meanwhile, Smith pulled out his encrypted smartphone and placed a call back to Camp Perry to inform General Lancaster of the situation. When he hung up, his expression was grim. "Lancaster isn't sure if the Navy can pick us up ahead of schedule. Unfortunately, we're going to have to sit out in the water for several hours if we want to avoid being cornered at the marina." Off the coast of Brazil. The C-17 pilot gave control of the aircraft over to his co-pilot so he could take a quick bio break and head back into the bay to find the Navy lieutenant in charge of this mission. He spotted the only guy with bars on his collar and walked up to him. "Sir, can I talk with you privately for a second?" he asked. Lieutenant Calland got up and followed him toward the ladder that led to the flight deck. "There's been a slight change to our plans. Apparently, something's gone seriously wrong for the team on the ground, and they need to exfil several hours ahead of schedule. We've got enough fuel to hold off on refueling while we increase speed to get you guys in position. So I wanted to let you know we'll probably be dropping you guys off close to 2 hours ahead of schedule." Callan acknowledged the information and passed it along to his guys. "Also, listen up. There have been some updates in our rules of engagement since we've been in the air," he announced. "You are now authorized to use deadly force to protect the package, who just happens to be none other than Roberto Lammy, the Director General of the World Trade Organization. That's right, the very man that the entire government of Brazil and half a dozen intelligence agencies are aggressively trying to find in Rio de Janeiro." Several of the guys let out a soft whistle, realizing the firestorm they were about to jump into. If the guys on the ground had been compromised, then they might have to shoot their way out of the country. Off the coast of Brazil. As the captain of the USS Laboon sat in his chair in the CIC, an ensign walked up to him with a paper in hand. "Sir, we just received a flash message from NMCC," the young man announced. Raising an eyebrow at the news, Commander Ross took the piece of paper and read it over. This is not good, he thought. He grabbed the phone that connected him to the bridge and spoke to the XO. "I need to speak to you right away," he insisted. A few minutes later, his XO walked up to him. "I heard we got a hot message," he remarked. Commander Ross nodded. "We did. There's been a change to our mission timeline and the rules of engagement. We need to get to the extraction point 2 hours early if possible. We've also been authorized to use deadly force to protect the package. Here, look at this," he said as he handed the XO the orders. The XO silently read the contents of the papers for a moment. His left eyebrow rose. "Isn't this the guy they've been talking about on the news?" he asked. "Didn't our intelligence summary say the entire country was looking for him?" "Yeah, it did," Ross confirmed. "I wasn't sure why it had been included in our intelligence update the other day, but I understand now. We're supposed to link up with the recovery team getting him out of the country, and then escort him back to NAS Mayfair. From there, he'll be flown to Norfolk. This could be tricky if the Brazilians catch wind that he's being smuggled out by boat." "Agreed. When we get to the exfil point, make sure our shooters are on deck, in case they need to provide some small arms cover. Also, tell the air boss to have his Hellos armed with Hellfires. Not sure we'll need them, but I'd rather have them loaded and ready than need them and not have them." Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Marina da Gloria. "We're coming up to the marina," Rich told Seth and Smith. "I'm going to park us under those trees near the entrance. You guys stay here and get him ready while I go check on the boat." He parked the vehicle, leaving them the ignition fob in case they needed it for some reason. Seth opened his small black backpack and retrieved his leather pouch with his concoction of interrogation drugs. He pulled one of the syringes out and filled it up a quarter of the way with the happy drug. Then he turned to face Mr. Roberto Lamy. He snapped his fingers to get his attention. "The drug I'm about to give you is going to make you feel super relaxed. This isn't going to hurt you in the least. Now, when I take this tape off your mouth and give you this drug, we're going to walk with you to a boat that we'll take out to sea." Roberto's eyes went wide when he heard the words boat and sea. He tried to say something but couldn't with the tape on. Seth reached over and pulled the tape off so he could say his piece. "I've told you what I know. Please don't kill me." He started whimpering and crying, fearful of death. Smith looked at Seth as if to say, "Shut him up already." Seth gently tapped Mr. Lamy on the cheek. "Look at me, Rob. We're not going to kill you. We're actually trying to save you. Those people you told us about, they're trying to kill you to shut you up. What we're going to do right now is move you to a boat and get you out to sea. We're going to link up with some folks who are going to get us out to a U.S. destroyer. They'll escort us back to the U.S., where we can get you moved to a safe location. There you'll be able to testify under oath as to what's been going on," Seth explained. He hated wasting time like this and telling him so much, but he knew if he could convince Roberto that he needed to cooperate with them if he wanted to live, it would go a long way towards making this great escape go a lot smoother. Roberto took a couple of deep breaths and stopped sobbing. "Okay, I understand," he answered. "Just keep me alive. If you can keep me alive and get my wife out of the country like we agreed, I'll tell your court everything I told you." Seth moved closer to Mr. Lamy and reached for the man's left arm, lifting the sleeve of his polo shirt and injecting the liquid into his deltoid muscle. A few seconds later, the drug went to work. His eyes glazed over a bit, and he became a lot more docile. Just then, Rich approached the BMW. He opened the driver's side door and climbed in. "I just checked on the boat. It's ready. We've got a full tank and we're all paid up. We probably have another 20 minutes until the sun's down. Do you want to sit tight here for a bit until it's dark, or get going?" Smith glanced over at Seth. "What do you think?" he asked. "I think the sooner we get him on board and get out of the marina, the better. We have no idea if the Brazilians are going to lock down the marina or the harbor. For all we know, they could search every boat trying to leave Rio. True. I just hope James and Julia are able to play a convincing enough role back at the house to buy us some more time, Smith said nervously. They will. I saw Julia giving James goo-goo eyes the last couple of days. They'll make it look convincing. Their story will hold, Rich said in their defense. Julia was a local asset that helped them manage the safe house, and James was one of the JSOC operators on Task Force Avenger. When they'd had to leave the safe house, Smith had thrown together a quick exfil plan. Julia and James would stay behind at the safe house and pretend to be fooling around in the pool when the police raided the place. They'd pretend to be a couple who had rented the place from a friend. Their job was to slow the police down and give Smith and Seth more time to get away. The ambassador would work on securing their freedom later. All right, then let's get him out to the boat, Smith said, the decision made. Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, CIA safe house. Michael Dwyer, a man from an Irish security firm that had been hired in a roundabout way by Johann Baer to locate Mr. Roberto Lamy, walked up to the palatial estate, observing all of the activity carefully. The police were bringing out some electronic equipment, presumably to analyze evidence on site to see if they could find anything useful. Upon entering the front room of the estate, he was drawn in by the rich decorations. The walls were inlaid with mahogany, and there was intricate crown molding along the ceiling. Walking further down the hallway, Dwyer entered an ornately adorned living room with large overstuffed leather couches and 2 leather chairs. The room opened into a kitchen that a master chef would be envious of. The eating area and kitchen flowed to a covered patio that led to an infinity pool, overlooking the city below and the ocean. Next to the pool was an oversized hot tub with a covered 8-seat bar. This was a home designed for entertaining large numbers of people, wealthy people. After taking a moment to immerse himself in the beauty of this place, Dwyer walked out to the patio and headed toward the real reason he had been summoned to this villa. Sitting under the patio, near a couple of guards, was a man who was probably in his early 30s. He was shirtless, sporting white board shorts. The man had shaggy blonde hair and a couple of tattoos on his right arm and chest. Dwyer squinted. The man before him looked calm, relaxed even. Michael Dwyer had seen this type of character before. He didn't believe for a second that the man was there on vacation with a hot local girl. He's a killer, he thought. He could tell as he looked in his eyes and observed his demeanor. Dwyer turned to size up the woman next to him. She was very beautiful. Her skimpy Brazilian thong bikini was barely covering any part of her voluptuous figure. With her perfect olive complexion and long brown hair that ended midway down her back, she could have easily passed as a model. She was the perfect honeypot, the distraction. She also seemed unusually comfortable with what was going on around them, like she had expected it. I need to rattle them, Dwyer thought. Dwyer walked over to the lead police inspector and Cardoso, the Brazilian intelligence agency rep that was his chaperone. Leaning in, and talking so only they could hear him, he asked, "What are my rules for questioning them?" "I was told do whatever you deem necessary to get the location of Mr. Lamy," Cardoso replied quickly, before the inspector could say anything. The police inspector's mouth hung open for a second. He looked like he was about to lodge a protest until Cardoso shook his head. The inspector then called out to his police officers, "Time to leave, men," and they all exited the premises. Clearly, he didn't want his officers to be a part of whatever was about to come next. If they didn't see it, he couldn't be held responsible for it. This left the man and the woman at the table, under guard by a couple of Dwyer's men. Dwyer took another look around the estate with Cardoso to try and get a sense of what this place was and who these 2 people might be. The estate was large. In addition to the villa and expansive pool and outdoor bar area, there were 3 outbuildings. One seemed to be some sort of garage or oversized shed, and the second building looked like a large guest house of sorts. But it was the third building he found most odd. It appeared to house what must have been 2 cells or interrogation rooms. There was a small observation room that sat between the 2 rooms with a one-sided mirror, allowing whoever was inside to observe the interrogation. What struck Dwyer as truly odd was the differences between these 2 rooms. One was staged to appear rather dingy and dilapidated, while the other room looked very sterile, almost like some sort of surgical room or a mid-century modern office space. There was also a lot of computer equipment, cameras, and other stuff that confirmed his suspicions. This was a CIA black site. It was also the most likely place the Americans had stashed Mr. Lamy. Just outside the building, Cardoso pointed to a chimney that was partially obscured by a tree. A small amount of smoke was still wafting into the air there. Then, as they approached the tree, something seemed off. "It's fake. This isn't real," Dwyer realized. It looked like some of the other trees nearby, but the leaves were a very realistic plastic and fabric hybrid. As they approached the artificial tree and base of the chimney, they discovered what appeared to be an industrial-grade incinerator. It was well hidden, designed not to stand out. Dwyer put his hand out. It was still hot. There was a low hum to the machine as it continued to run through its burn cycle. Someone had clearly thrown whatever they could into the device before they'd arrived to prevent them from finding something important. Dwyer ran his hand along the side of the machine and eventually found the panel cover. Lifting it, he observed a timer, slowly counting down. There were 3 minutes and 27 seconds left. A few buttons identified the different burn cycles: paper, metals, and organic material. The metal button was the one currently glowing. The contents inside were probably electronics that the CIA wanted to get rid of. His eyes drifted back to the organic material button and lingered. "Damn, they probably dispose of bodies they want to make disappear in this thing," he thought. For half a second he worried that Mr. Lamy might be inside. Then he realized he was far too valuable. So where did they go with him? Dwyer wondered. How are they going to get him out of the country? Dwyer walked away from the building at the end of the property and turned to face Cardoso. "Mr. Lamy was here," he asserted. "This place is clearly a CIA black site or safe house of sorts. No one has an interrogation building like that unless they're interviewing people," he insisted, using air quotes around the word interviewing. Cardoso nodded. "I agree. We've known the CIA was operating a site like this in our country, but we had no idea where. We need to find out who owns this place and who all works here. Then we need to track down who's been coming and going and when." Dwyer walked back toward the kitchen with Cardoso. His intelligence analyst, the quasi-IT guy, was getting set up. "Liam, pull up the drone feed we have of the area. See if you can find this place on it," he directed. "Then see if you can spot any vehicles coming or going from here any time today." Liam was an exceptional analyst and an IT savant. If anyone could find their needle in the haystack, it would be him. When Dwyer's company had been contracted to find Mr. Lamy, one of the first things they had done was establish a handful of surveillance drones over the city. Now that they had a lead, they could rewind the video feed and get to work. "How do you want to go about questioning them?" Cardoso asked, eyeing their 2 subjects. "We'll question her," Dwyer insisted. "She's the weak one, but we'll use the big guy." "You don't want to start with him?" Cardoso asked skeptically. Dwyer shook his head. "No, he's a soldier. He's been trained to resist, and we don't have time to break him down. We need answers, and we need them fast. She's our best bet." Dwyer walked around the kitchen island and opened one of the drawers. He found a couple of steak knives and a meat tenderizer. He gathered a collection and walked out to the patio. "Bring the woman over here," he directed. "Tie the tough guy up over there. Restrain his arms, hands, feet, and neck to the chair." Dwyer's men did as they were told. The man and woman were now sitting opposite each other, looking nervously at each other and wondering what was going to happen next. Dwyer plopped down in a chair next to the man while keeping his eyes on the woman. "We know Roberto Lamy was here," he said confidently. "We've seen your interrogation room. It's obvious this is a CIA black site. So let's just dispense with your cover story. We're not buying it." His Irish accent seemed especially thick in that moment. The woman looked a bit nervous when he finished speaking. Her eyes darted between the man Dwyer was sitting next to and the meat tenderizer and steak knives he had placed on the table. Dwyer smiled. He had her attention. "Julia, is it?" he asked. She nodded but didn't say anything. "We know Roberto Lamy was being held here. What I want to know is how long ago did he leave?" he queried, keeping his tone light-hearted for the moment. She held her chin up and continued to say nothing. "Okay, I get it. You don't want to talk to me," Dwyer responded. "You want to play it tough? Then here's what we're going to do. Each time you fail to answer one of my questions, I'm going to hurt your boyfriend here." The woman looked at the man with panic in her eyes. "Don't worry about me, Jules. Stay strong," the mystery man insisted. "They're just going to kill us as soon as you tell them anything." Dwyer shook his head. "That's not necessarily true. If you cooperate, we'll let you live. If not, well, then this is going to be painful for you both." He pulled a small pouch out of his cargo pants pocket. Unzipping it, he took out a small spray bottle. He removed the cap and turned to face the American, spraying one shot into the man's ear. His prisoner tried to struggle for a moment before his entire body went limp. Dwyer returned his gaze back to the woman. "I gave your friend a paralytic drug. It essentially freezes his body for the next couple of hours. While he can't move, he will be able to feel, see, and hear everything." "You're a sick, pathetic little man," Julia shouted. Then she spat on him, anger burning in her eyes. Moving with lightning speed, Dwyer slapped her hard across the face. Julia looked stunned. Then a tear briefly formed in the corner of her left eye. A red mark was already forming on her face. "Let's try this again. When did Roberto Lamy leave the compound?" Dwyer asked, grit in his voice now. "Go to hell!" Julia yelled. "Have it your way." Dwyer cut the zip-tie restraints off the man's left arm and hand. Then he placed his hand on the table. Grabbing the meat tenderizer, he hammered the man's pinky finger with one hard, vicious blow. The American grunted as he did his best to stifle a scream. He glared at Dwyer with hatred. "How long ago did Mr. Lamy leave the compound?" Dwyer asked again. He could see the woman's lower lip quivering. "I don't know." "Aha! See? He was here. That wasn't so hard to admit," Dwyer said soothingly. "Now, let's dispense with this charade. Your poor American's finger is a bloody mess. How long ago did Mr. Lamy leave the compound?" "Don't tell him anything," the American managed to muffle out. Dwyer picked the tenderizer up and this time placed it over the man's left ring finger, right near the middle knuckle. He looked at Julia, who tried to turn away. One of the guards held her head and made her watch. Bam! The American let out a guttural scream this time as his next finger was shattered. His 2 broken fingers were now bleeding from the trauma. "Julia, I could do this all day. But at some point, your poor friend here is going to run out of fingers. Then I'm going to have to start on his toes. By the time you finally tell me what I want to know, this poor sap won't have any fingers or toes left. You'll be leaving him with 4 bloody stumps and no toes to walk with. What kind of life are you condemning him to?" Julia looked so conflicted. Tears ran down her face. Sweat poured down her forehead. Dwyer let her sit in the uncomfortable pause for a moment. "They left around 4 p.m., she finally blurted out. The man with the battered fingers looked defeated. Smiling, Dwyer said, "See? That wasn't so hard. James might still keep his fingers and toes. Now, where were they going?" Julia now began to sob uncontrollably. "She doesn't know that information. She was never told anything," the American muttered through gritted teeth. It was clear he was doing his best to fight against the throbbing pain. Dwyer nodded his head. "Okay, I can buy that. She's just the local help. So you didn't include her in everything. But that means you know." Dwyer got up and walked around the table. He nodded to one of his guards who held Julia's head while he sprayed the paralytic drug in her ear. A few seconds later, her entire body went limp. Then he sat down next to her, picked up her hand, and placed it on the table. He saw her eyes grow wide as saucers as she realized what he was about to do. Her American friend had been trained to withstand torture, but Dwyer could tell that she had not. No, please don't do this," she whimpered. "I just work here. I wasn't involved in anything. I don't know anything. Please, God, don't do this to me." Tears streamed down her face. Dwyer coldly replied, "I'm not doing anything to you, love. Your friend here is. If he doesn't want to answer my questions, well, then you're going to have to learn how to get by without fingers or toes." The American looked like he wanted to jump out of his chair and rip his head off, but he still couldn't move his body because of the drug. "Now, we've established that Mr. Lamy was here. We've established that he left at 4 p.m., nearly 90 minutes ago. I think you've given your friends enough of a head start. So why don't you tell me where they are going, so we don't have to mutilate poor Julia here?" With hate burning in his eyes, the American tried to turn his head, but couldn't because of the drug, so he tried to close his eyes. "No, you don't get to escape watching this, James. Can I call you James?" Dwyer asked. He motioned for the guard behind him to hold the man's eyes open. He reached down and grabbed the meat tenderizer. With one swift motion, he slammed it down on Julia's pinky finger, shattering the bone and pulverizing it. Julia didn't even try to hold her emotions in check. She let out a terrible scream of pain and agony. With tears running down her face, she begged, "Please tell them what you know." After several gasping sobs, she pleaded, "Don't leave me a mutilated mess." "Damn you," the American muttered. He hung his head low. Finally, he admitted, "They took him to the marina. They're going to smuggle him out of the country by boat." Smiling, Dwyer put his arm around Julia. "Now that's a keeper," he said, acid dripping through each word. "This guy must really have feelings for you, because he just gave up his friends and comrades for you. That's a big deal." With his arm still around Julia, he looked back at the American. "What marina did they bring him to, James?" "That part I don't know. I wasn't going to be part of that plan. My job was to burn the classified material and keep you guys occupied for as long as I could." How are you going to get out of the country? I was going to present myself to the U.S. Embassy, and they would fly me out on a diplomatic flight. Is that how the rest of your team is going to get out of the country? There isn't a rest of the team. It was just me and the guy smuggling Lammy out of the marina, the American explained. Dwyer shook his head. James, I thought you and I had just reached an understanding, he said in a voice that sounded disappointed, almost hurt. I ask you questions, you tell me the truth, and Julia here gets to keep her fingers. You just lied to me. Before any of them could say anything, Dwyer had the meat tenderizer in his hand and smashed Julia's left ring finger. She screamed again before another wave of sobbing overtook her. For God's sake, stop hurting her, the American shouted. God has nothing to do with it, James, Dwyer responded. You do. Now, is this how the rest of your team is going to get out of the country? James didn't say anything, but he nodded. See? That wasn't so hard. Dwyer nodded to Cardoso, who walked back into the house as he pulled his smartphone out. He was going to call his masters and alert them that the State Department official meeting with the Prime Minister was just a ruse to get the Americans out of the country. He would also pass along the information about the marina and explain that they could be trying to smuggle Mr. Lammy out that way as well. With any luck, they could close the marinas and stop any boats from leaving the harbor. Returning his gaze to James, Dwyer asked, So your American friends are going to put Mr. Lammy into a boat and then take him out to sea? He shook his head. I'm not buying it. Who's going to pick them up? How are they really getting him out of the country? Sensing the American's hesitation to answer the question, Dwyer grabbed the steak knife and proceeded to cut Julia's pinky finger off. She screamed and wailed, and then summarily passed out from the pain. Enough! Stop hurting her! I've been telling you everything I know! The American shouted. Dwyer launched himself out of his chair and leaned over the table, thrusting face within inches of the man before him. No, he insisted. You haven't. You don't seem to understand something, James. I don't care about you or Julia. I have no interest in killing either of you, but I'm here to find Roberto Lammy. And right now, you're hindering me from doing that. So you either start cooperating and tell me what I need to know so I can reunite this man with his family, or I'm going to mutilate this beautiful woman. As Dwyer sat back down, he glared at the American. I'm not going to kill her, James. I'm going to hurt her, scar her, and make it so she'll never work a normal job again. Then I'm going to leave you alive, so you can live with the knowledge of what you did to this woman. All you have to do to prevent that from happening is tell me how they are getting Lammy out of the country. The American glared back at him for a moment before he finally complied. There's a destroyer that's going to meet up with them at sea. That's how they're going to get out of the country. Dwyer smiled. See? That wasn't so hard. Had you told me that a few minutes ago, Julia would still have her finger. Now what did Mr. Lammy tell you guys? He asked. Dwyer couldn't help but notice James' demeanor suddenly change. A stupid grin spread across his face. What did he tell us? He repeated. He told us everything. Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Marina da Gloria. Seth and Smith helped Roberto walk over to the boat Rich had rented for them. Darkness had finally arrived, but the marina was well lit up. From an outside perspective, it would have looked like two people were helping a drunk friend walk to their boat. A couple walked by, and Rich muttered something in Portuguese about their friend who couldn't hold his liquor. Fortunately, no one had recognized Lammy yet, but Seth wasn't confident their luck would hold if they ran into any more people. As they continued down the dock, they eventually came to a boat named Lane Spirit Ferretti, a beautiful 38-foot speedboat with a twin engine and cabin. They helped get Roberto to lie down, while Rich got the engine started and cast off their lines. "Check the bedroom," Rich said to Seth as he steered them out of the marina. Seth made his way to the only bedroom on the boat, where he found a note that read, "Under the bed." He squinted at the note before lifting the bed up and revealing a storage compartment. Seth smiled. He reached down and picked up an FN Minimi Mk3 light machine gun, a short-barreled weapon that fired belt-fed 7.62mm rounds. Next to that weapon were 3 50-round pouches of ammo. Smith walked into the room to join him. "Man, when you agency guys want firepower, you don't mess around," Seth remarked jovially. "You just go for the best, don't you?" Smith laughed. "Well, Seth, when money isn't a problem and you have no bureaucratic oversight, you'd be surprised what you can get done. Which one do you want?" Seth looked back down and pointed to the Scar L assault rifle. "Figured you'd leave me with this pig," Smith replied as Seth handed him the machine gun. Smith grabbed the 6 loaded 30-round magazines and the chest rig and carried the ensemble to the cabin. He placed them where they would be out of sight of anyone that might casually pass their boat, but ready to be used in a hurry should the need arise. 10 minutes went by as they continued out of the marina and harbor. They eventually motored right past Isla de Cotunduba, a small island that used to house a military fort to protect the harbor. As they moved past the island, Rich applied a lot more power to the engines. The boat picked up speed, putting more distance between themselves and the people trying to find them. As they cleared the edge of the harbor and got past the breakwater, Seth turned around to look behind them. He saw the silhouette of something. A medium-sized ship was sailing toward them, like it was following them. Grabbing the night vision spotter scope from his bag, he looked at the vessel, trying to figure out if it was a threat. The first thing he noticed was a gun mounted to the front of it. Damn, that doesn't look good. Turning to find Smith, he called out for him to join him. As Smith walked up to him, he handed him the spotter scope. "Tell me what you see." As he looked behind them, Smith swore under his breath. He marched up to the flying bridge and handed Rich the spotter scope. "Hey, what do you make of this?" he asked, as he pointed to the dark object in the water behind them. "Damn. It looks like a corvette. Do you think he's after us?" Rich asked. "Hell if I know. I think you better get us moving a bit faster. I'm going to send another message to headquarters that we need help. Right freaking now." Off the coast of Rio de Janeiro. "We're coming up on the drop zone," the crew chief called out to Lieutenant Calland. The C-17 Globemaster started leveling out for its descent. The internal bay lights switched over to red. One of the other crew chiefs opened the rear hatch of the plane, allowing the cool air to swirl through the bay. Then they prepped the pallets with the rigid inflatable boats on them, making sure they were ready to be kicked out the back. The Navy Special Warfare operators ran through their equipment checks, making sure their parachutes and gear were prepared. Once the ribs were cut loose, they'd have to run out of the aircraft after them. Otherwise, they would end up being dropped a long way from their boats. Calland looked at each of the boat chiefs who would manage the crews assigned to them. They both gave him a thumbs up, letting him know they were ready. Then the SEALs brandished a thumbs up too. They were locked and loaded. Calland flashed the loadmaster his own thumbs up. They were a go. Seconds later, the drag chute for the first rib was released and thrown out the back of the plane. It quickly caught and filled with air, pulling itself taut. The loadmaster then released the locks holding the pallet with the second rib on it. It shot out the back swiftly. Within a second of starting their free fall, the 3 parachutes attached to the ribs had opened, slowing the boats down on their trip to the water. As soon as the ribs cleared the cargo bay, both lines of operators ran after them as they launched themselves right out the back of the plane. They fell for a second or two in the darkness and then deployed their own chutes. It was a short drop since they were jumping from around 500 feet. The operators did their best to angle themselves to land in the water as close as possible to the ribs, which were now rising and falling in the waves. When Lieutenant Calland got closer to the water, he readied himself mentally to release from his parachute. This was the one part of his job that he hated, jumping at night into a dark ocean. Seeing the water quickly approaching, Calland hit his quick release and fell free of his parachute the remaining 20 or so feet to the dark water below. As his body crashed through the water, he felt himself plummeting into the wet abyss for a moment before his safety vest automatically inflated. The CO2 cartridge did its job and filled his vest up with air, quickly shooting him and his equipment to the surface. When his face broke through the water, he took a big gasp of air. Calland immediately looked around for the others and saw a few IR flashing strobe lights indicating where they were. Then he spotted the flashing IR light that was higher above the water, the rib. He swam to it. When he reached the edge, he climbed aboard. Seconds later, several others started climbing in. The crew began the process of preparing for combat. Now that everyone was on board, they turned the strobe light off and started putting on their IBA and combat rigs. The radio and engines were flipped on. Next, they used the GPS to calculate their exact location and destination. They had roughly 60 miles to cover and not a lot of time to do it in. 20 minutes into their journey to extract a high-value package, Lieutenant Calland got an urgent call from the Laboon. After his conversation, he relayed the news over the crew's internal communication network. "Listen up, guys. The agency asset with the package is being pursued by a Brazilian Navy patrol boat. We've been instructed to make best possible speed to retrieve the package and then get the hell out of there. We've been given the green light to engage the patrol boat if necessary, but we are to protect the package at all costs. This mission is of foremost importance to the war effort." The SEALs before him nodded and readied their weapons. One of the ribs was armed with a Mark 19 40mm grenade gun and an M240 light machine gun mounted in the rear of the boat. The other rib had an M2 50 cal in the rear with the M240 mounted in the front. For small ribs, they packed a lot of firepower. If they had to carry out a hot extraction, they should have more than enough firepower to make that happen. They raced along at maximum speed to the rendezvous point. It wasn't long before Lieutenant Calland spotted something on the horizon. A bright searchlight was being aimed at something. They steered toward the light and continued toward it like a guiding beacon. 5 minutes went by as they watched the Brazilian patrol boat close the distance on its target. It looked like the agency assets were trying to outrun it in a rather large vessel that was designed more for play than speed. As they approached the two boats, Calland saw the bow-mounted gun on the Brazilian boat fire a couple of times. The agency boat slowed down, and someone on the patrol boat started issuing commands in Portuguese. Pointing to the Brazilians, SB-1 Ross yelled, "It looks like they're about to be overtaken and boarded." Lieutenant Calland took the night vision binoculars Ross was handing him and surveyed the scene. "Damn, that patrol boat may have damaged their engine," he realized. The agency assets were dead in the water. Depressing the talk button on his mic, Calland announced, "Prepare to attack that patrol boat. I'm going to announce our presence and let them know that this boat is under the protection of the U.S. Navy. Be ready, guys." SB-1 Ross shook his head, and Calland understood why. The whole point had been to do this operation as a stealth mission. But if they didn't announce themselves, it would certainly result in a shootout with the Brazilian Navy. Lieutenant Calland grabbed the microphone handset. "Brazilian Navy, this is the United States Navy," he announced over the loudspeaker. "This civilian craft has U.S. persons traveling on it and is under the protection of the U.S. Navy. Stand down and don't attempt to board or you will be fired upon." Two of the Navy SEALs fired off flare guns into the night sky to illuminate the civilian speedboat they were racing toward and help them see what kind of patrol boat they were facing. The Brazilian boat wasn't particularly large, but it did have a small cannon mounted on the front. There were also half a dozen or so Brazilian Marines near the rear of the vessel that were climbing into their own rib to head over to the American speedboat. Lieutenant Calland hailed them one more time as their ribs pulled up closer to the agency boat. Calland signaled for his rib to stay moving, in case they needed to provide covering fire. The other U.S. rib moved closer to the disabled boat so the SEALs could extract the package. The patrol boat responded, using their own PA system. "This is the Brazilian Navy. These are criminals who have kidnapped a Brazilian citizen. We are taking them into custody. Stand down or we will be forced to fire on you." "We've got more trouble, LT," shouted SB-1 Ross as he pointed toward the coast, some 20 or so miles away. Off in the distance, at least 2 helicopters were flying toward them. Calland grabbed for the radio that would connect him to the laboon. He relayed what he saw and requested help ASAP. The officer on the other end replied that they already had their helo on the way to them, but it was still roughly 50 miles out. The laboon itself was moving toward them at flank speed, but it was at least 15 minutes out. The other American rib had reached the speedboat, and 2 of the SEALs took up position on the agency boat and trained their weapons on the Brazilians. The other SEAL had gone inside the cabin to retrieve the package. A minute later, he emerged from the cabin with 3 men. 2 of them appeared to be heavily armed, and the third man looked like he needed to be helped. He might have been injured. The Brazilian Marines pulled up a couple dozen meters short of the American boat in their own rib. The gunners on the U.S. Navy rib trained their weapons on them. "Stand down!" shouted the Brazilians over the PA. "You must allow us to take these kidnappers into custody." The SEALs ignored the warning and loaded Mr. Lamy into their rib. "We will not allow you to leave with the kidnap victim," the Brazilian officer shouted, this time sounding more determined, even angry. The other Brazilian Marines aboard that boat began shouting at the Americans, but they kept their rifles at the low ready. The Brazilian Marines on the other vessel started shouting at the Americans, but also kept their rifles at the low ready. Then a Brazilian helicopter arrived on the scene. It shined its spotlight on the rib with Mr. Lamy on it. "Damn," thought Calland. "There goes the last hope of keeping this mission low profile." At this point, the 2 other men with him had climbed aboard, and so had the SEALs. The Americans began to push off from the speedboat when one of the Brazilian Marines raised his rifle to fire at them. The SEALs moved their weapons to the Marine, illuminating him with their rifles' laser designators, but they held their fire. A tense couple of seconds passed as the boat driver of the American vessel applied some power and turned them away from the disabled speedboat. Bang! A shot rang out. A bright flash sparked on one of the 2 outboard engines on the American vessel. The engine had taken a direct hit. In that instant, the rear gunner opened fire on the Brazilian Marines closest to them. The driver of the boat did his best to get them out of there with their remaining good engine. "Ah, hell, here we go," Calland thought. "Light 'em up," he shouted. Seth held on for dear life as the driver of their rib did his best to speed away from danger. Looking behind him, Seth saw the 50 cal gunner banging away at the helicopter that had just lit up the other rib. Whoever was in that other boat had decided to turn around and attack the Brazilians head-on. They were doing their best to buy them some more time to get away into the darkness. "Stop shooting!" called out the boat driver to the rear gunner. The man stopped firing his weapon, and the boat driver made a few course corrections to throw off anyone who might have thought that they knew where they were going. Even with a single engine, the rib was still fast. "But can we outrun the patrol boat?" Seth asked himself. A second later, the rib behind them blew up. As the flames and debris rained down on the water, the helicopter turned its light in a different direction as the pilot continued his search for them. Off in the distance, Seth saw several more helicopters coming out to join in the search. There were also 2 more patrol boats racing to join the original one. While not yet in danger of sinking, the original Brazilian patrol boat had 2 small fires their crew were trying to put out. It had stopped speeding toward Seth's rib. As a matter of fact, it appeared to be dead in the water. "What do we do now?" Seth asked the driver. "We continue to race to the lagoon and hope like hell those helicopters don't find us," the man replied. 5 minutes went by as the other helicopters searched the area. 2 of them must have either spotted them or found them on their FLIR, because they were now heading right for them with their searchlights on. One of the choppers finally managed to illuminate them with their beam. Both Brazilian boats immediately headed toward them at top speed. One of the machine gun operators aboard Seth's rib started firing at the helicopter. Then the other one joined in. Together, they forced the helicopter to break off and fly to a higher altitude. The Ma Deuce gunner continued to fire some rounds to keep them from getting too close. "Those 2 boats are gaining on us," shouted one of the SEALs to the driver. "Yeah, I see that. The lagoon's helo is nearly to us. They're going to take care of the patrol boats," he replied. Just then, 2 missiles streaked through the night sky. They flew right past the Brazilian helicopters and slammed into the patrol boats, unleashing fiery explosions. While neither of the boats was in danger of sinking yet, they quickly discontinued their pursuit of the American rib. The helicopters also turned away and headed back to the patrol boats. Seth breathed a deep sigh of relief. For the next 15 minutes, the American helo stayed with them as it escorted them to the lagoon. When they pulled up to the American warship, a number of crewmen were standing by to help them get aboard and load the rib up on the ship. When Smith and Seth climbed aboard, they made sure Mr. Lammy was quickly taken down to sickbay so they could give him a good once-over to make sure he was okay. Then Seth found a lieutenant who appeared to be in charge near the helicopter bay. He walked up to him. "I'm Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell from JSOC," he said. "I need to speak to the captain." The lieutenant nodded and led him and Smith through the ship as they made their way to the CIC. Once they entered the ship's nerve center, the lieutenant led them over to the captain. "Sir, the agency folks wanted to speak with you," he explained. The captain stood up and guided them out the hatch so they could stand outside and talk away from prying ears. "I'm Commander Jet. What the hell is going on?" he asked. "I'm Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell, and this is Smith from the agency. The man you helped us extract was Roberto Lamy, the Director General of the World Trade Organization. He's provided us with some invaluable intelligence about who was behind the election rigging and the genesis of the UN peacekeeping mission. So we have to get him back to the U.S. at all costs, Captain." The captain stared at the 2 of them for a second. He appeared to be trying to figure out if they were serious. Smith cleared his throat. "Captain, there's a good chance the Brazilians may attack this ship to prevent us from bringing Mr. Lamy to the U.S. You need to be prepared to deal with whatever they may throw at you," he explained. Commander Jet shook his head, then cursed a couple of times under his breath before he returned his attention to them. "All right. Thank you for cluing me in on what the hell is going on. All I'd been told is I needed to recover you guys and not allow anything to get in my way. Now I understand why. So here's what I want you guys to do. Go down to sick bay and check on your boy. Get some food, and one of my guys will get you put up in officer country. Let me worry about fighting the ship while you guys protect Mr. Lamy. If you need anything at all, please let me know." When they returned into the CIC, the radar screen showed 6 planes forming up around Rio. They were still more than 90 miles away, but that could change rapidly. The rest of the evening went by in a blur. the Brazilians appeared at a few points like they were going to attack the Laboon, but ultimately they backed off. The Brazilian Navy hailed the American ship no less than a dozen times, directing them to stand down and return Mr. Lamy. Several Brazilian destroyers and frigates also assembled at a point further north of their position, and it appeared that they might try to intercept the Laboon as it headed back to the Caribbean. For the next 24 hours, the Laboon played a game of cat and mouse, as the captain sought to keep the ship out of reach of the Brazilian Navy's weapon systems. When a group of Brazilian aircraft flew within range of their surface-to-air missiles, the Laboon sent a few missiles in their direction, which forced their planes to break off their assault. It was a tense situation until 2 more Arleigh Burke destroyers lined up with them near French Guiana. At that point, the naval task force was too strong to even consider attacking, and the Brazilians called off the effort. Once the Laboon got within helicopter range of Eugene F. Correa International Airport in Guyana, they flew Mr. Lamy to the small airport, where a Gulf Stream would ferry him back to the U.S. To make sure no attempt would be made to shoot down the plane carrying Mr. Lamy, the Navy sent an EA-18 Growler along with a pair of F-35s to escort them to U.S. airspace. With Mr. Lamy safely in the U.S., Seth hoped that the conspiracy to destroy America and foment an internal civil war would finally unravel.
Thank you for watching our video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you'll never miss another video.
In the meantime, we have plenty of reading material to keep you busy. You can find it all on our website, frontlinepublishinginc.com.